our guide, Trustee Craig Westergard. How long have you been doing this for?
Over 30 years.
Right, so fantastic. So,
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you at the end.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. This tour today is very interesting. All of this originated from years ago. Many of you may remember there used to be an annual house tour in Roslyn, and we started doing it again. It was dormant. We started doing it again. Then COVID hit, and then of course nobody wanted anybody in their house. And so last year, I've done them before, but last year we picked up and we started doing these walking tours. And we found that the walking tour is much more successful. Tom Powell here, I want to give him kudos because he runs the Cedarmere here, and he is the guy. You know, he's the Cedarmere guru. I always like coming to this mill building. You know, this is William Cullen Bryant's house. And if you don't know William Cullen Bryant, I'm not going to get into him, but he was a poet, journalist, and I think, wasn't he too a politician? Did he run?
Yeah, never ran.
He never did run?
Newspaper writer.
A newspaper. Influencer. Very good, thank you. Anyway, we're going to look at two mill buildings today. What I really want to focus on today, because we're in this part of the village, is not really the buildings of antiquity, but rather we're going to look at things that have been done within the last 30 years here in Roslyn, because a tremendous amount of stuff has happened. When I first started, the word was that Roslyn was a place and it hadn't changed in 150 years. In essence, it was exactly the same, pretty much the same. The biggest building in the community was the Roslyn Savings Bank. So that's why today we're going to talk, we have a couple of historic buildings, but we're going to talk about a lot of new stuff that's been going on over the last 30 years. So it's not, while it's history, it's not the kind of history maybe you expected to come and see. But the real exciting part of today is we're going to, for the first time, we're going to get to go into this Rallye Motors Mercedes-Benz dealer. And that's the treat. So we're going to start here, and Tom, we'll talk about the building briefly. Just looking at it is the beauty of coming here and seeing this, because this little Gothic cottage that Bryant had built in 1862. It's a summer cottage and a mill building, and the mill building guts are in the bottom, but we'll talk about that when we get down there. Let's just quickly walk through the garden, because I love these gardens here. It's such a romantic notion, this whole house, and part of that architecturally are all of these little outbuildings. You know, there's a little tool shed there that was recently restored. You'll see this little boathouse that I remember Peggy Gary restored, but I think it's been restored again since then.
A couple of times.
Look at the bridge and the lily pond. I mean, if any of you have ever been to Monet's residence in France, it with the lily pads, I mean, it's just, and everything, every bit is just as nice, if not better. And then there's also the greenhouse.
Oh yes, we forgot about that.
Right?
Yep. Outside of this structure, all the woodwork and the brickwork, and then we did the interior and put up the wheel. Is this spring fed? Yes, it's all spring fed, no streams coming into it. So that's why it's clear as opposed to murky.
Just to note here, there's two things that we're going to talk about when we get into the village. One is the Roslyn Viaduct. You see the cars traversing it now. This is a good vantage point to see it. We're going to talk about that because that's a new bridge. And one of these large-scale buildings I was talking about was the building right to the left, the big one, which is originally was built by this fellow, Michael Daly. It was called the Forest City Daly, turned into I guess it was sold. It's now called the Atrium. It's a very high-end assisted living facility designed by a famous architect, Robert A.M. Stern. And we have more than one building here designed by famous architects.
So this is a Gothic revival. You'll see a lot of elements from Gothic cathedrals, which was kind of the romantic poetry and literature and art, and everything was going back to an earlier time before the Industrial Revolution. You see there's pointed arches and just the Victorian love for ornamentation. You can see on the barge board on the gable there, the wood that's been restored is a different color. So a good deal of the wood had to be restored. It was chewed up by insects and birds and you name it. That was done by Roslyn Landmarks. The chimney, all the brickwork, Gary Trust funding. So let's see. I think what we really want to do is turn on the mill. It goes under the path and into this box. That is a kind of a buffer. And then it'll go down the sluice and you'll hear it sloshing away. Once I open this up. Ooh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
There it is. So it fills the buckets, and the buckets, gravity is what does it. All those buckets fill up. When they reach the bottom, they spill out the contents. Away we go. The upstairs was a summer cottage. Downstairs was a workshop. Follow me to the lower entrance of the mill where the workshop is. The other side is all brick. That's where the wheel is. That window and all these arch boards, brickwork, door, everything is very Victorian, very decorative, elaborate. There's nothing survives, as far as we know, that it's a dual purpose like this. No. Anybody want to take the inside? Good. These are originals. You can see how much restoration work, how many things and holes and things we got for years. Actually, the reason they survived is because they took them down and they covered this up with some metal. Because there's so much trouble with people, many, many years before the county. Whooped. Come in. Watch your step. Step two. So you have the machinery here. There's a new machine, stored machinery is right here. These things all up in the ceiling, or it's the front of these belts. They're powered by that pulley. Then you can see the belt is lying there. That's a new belt. That'll turn this whole shaft along the wall. And these pulleys will go up to that one and across the room. There'll be machines all over the place. And over here we have a grain grinder. That's probably for corn. And this one's a sharpening wheel. This thing is really interesting. After the wooden wheel was built in the 60s, it probably lasted about 20 years. And then it had to be replaced. So it was replaced with a turbine, which was a technology that came in. It had been around, but it was pretty much the way to go. You were doing hydropower, and it still is. So the water is forced in, it's fed into these rusty old pipes on the ground there. They're all like twisted, wrapped and riveted. That's how they had to make pipes back then. So this was out in the mud and had been there for 100 years. Once they got electricity around the turn of the century, this was Yeah, they just left it.
So this was in lieu of the wheel. So you see that the wheel left. That was about 1865, I think.
The wheel was in 62.
62, but then shortly thereafter,
85.
85, the wheel came off, and then this gets hooked up to the sluiceway.
Well, it comes through a pipe.
Through the pipe.
A pipe.
Exactly, it would have to be.
Get the full blast. It's much more efficient, like 90% efficient. That one's maybe 40, 50, 60%. Most of the energy just splashes away.
Yeah.
And
so this was an alternative to the wheel, and it just turned a turbine and did identically the same thing.
Ran this whole thing.
So you can see this wheel's turning. It's all belt driven. And I always like to say, when you come and see these things, I mean, we're looking at old things now, and you're saying, "Oh God, look at all that old stuff." This was the high technology, right? This was somebody's cell phone down here. All right, this is the latest and greatest stuff of its time. And could you imagine how much energy and time goes into this? Like Tom was saying, you know, you have to switch these belts and get a different speed, like a bicycle. You know, things moved a lot slower then, not like today. This structure was built by this fellow named Michael Daly, who that's what he did. He did these projects. He came to us early on, and again, this was all a big industrial area. Not a real long time ago. This was all lumber yard.
I remember the lumber yard.
Right? All lumber yard. There's an aerial view here. I'll pass it around. This is a picture of the original bridge, okay? Taken from an airplane up there. And so this site is right here. And what do you see? This is all oil tanks and refinery facilities that was brought in. This was a navigable waterway, which it isn't anymore because all of the silt has come down now from Hempstead Harbor. There used to be tall ships that came in here, and this was a major port. So part of the agreement here, in order for him to build this thing much bigger than what it really would have been allowed by code, he was required to come in and do a multi-million-dollar site environmental cleanup. And I remember coming, I always like telling the story. I was down here myself, wandering around alone, and I was standing on top of this. I came upon this metal thing. It looked like it was enormous. It looked like I was standing on top of a submarine, you know, just the very top of it, and it just disappeared into the ground. I can't imagine what must have been underneath. And you could smell oil, and there was this gantry. It was a gigantic cleanup. And then Mike Daly hired this Robert A.M. Stern to design the place. Guy Ladd Frost, who was another local architect, and I, who were very involved with all of these things, we said, you know, maybe we're in a modern period, maybe it could be a little more modern rather than so traditional. And Mike said, no, Craig, when people are moving out of their houses and coming into a facility like this, they want it to look very residential. And they just love this idea of that porte cochere and colonnade. Anyway, so that's an important building here. But what I love talking about is this bridge. You know, we take the stance here in Roslyn. We have so many important buildings, and not only buildings, but structures here. I would have loved for them to have restored that old bridge because it was really very nice to look at. It was metal, but unfortunately that bridge had this what they call a pin hanger design, which was flawed. And some of you may remember back in 1983 there was another sister bridge of this one in Connecticut, the Mianus River Bridge. And literally this gigantic section in the middle of the night fell into the drink. So I'm going to pass this around. You probably can't see it very well. This patina green color here, this is the old bridge. And this is the old stanchions that held it up. And what they did is they had these wings sticking out, steel wings, and they cut them off on both sides. Because what did they have to do when they built this bridge? That you had to maintain the roadway. The original bridge was 1950. You're talking about 50 years later now. You think the traffic is less? The traffic is more. This bridge handles a tremendous amount of traffic every day. So what they did is they cut these wings off, they reduced it down to 3 lanes, and they literally had to keep 2 lanes open westbound in the morning. So they literally were moving these cones around every day so that there was 2 lanes in the morning going westbound, and in the afternoon when people were going home, there's 2 lanes going the other way. And then they literally built this bridge alongside of it. And then finally, when they were completed with this bridge, then they just tore the other one down. But they had, the way that they built it is they first made these piers, and then they would just put this one section in. You'll see it when you look carefully. This is one little section, and these are what's known as precast concrete pieces. They were all floated down here on barges, and then trucked into these locations. And then they had this gigantic, I mean, it's just hard to imagine. See the size of this, when you look at the picture, see the size of this machinery. The thing was, I mean, you're standing here, it was as big as standing here and going up and higher. This gigantic framework that had these pulleys here. So they'd literally pull a truck up, and you see all these joints? All of those is one section, and they would literally hoist that section in one piece at a time. And then they put this whole thing together, and inside of it, you'll see some pictures here also, there's these gigantic cables then that they tighten up at the very end to just hold the whole thing in place. The projected lifespan of this bridge is 75 years. And oddly enough, the name of the bridge today is the William Cullen Bryant Viaduct. For years, it's been called just the Roslyn Viaduct. And why is it called Viaduct? I have no idea. So what we're going to talk about next, we're going to walk down to the water here, and we're going to experience this waterway that I was talking about. Because, you know, one of the virtues of these projects is not only that there was an environmental cleanup, but what did they do? They also had to build a bulkhead and a boardwalk, as did this project. So this project called the Roslyn Landing, this is the one where the Stop and Shop was supposed to be built, didn't get built, but as part of their incentive bonuses and monies that they gave, they had built this wonderful promenade that we're going to walk along now. I like to talk just for a minute about this building over here. It's owned by a couple of local guys, and we have a couple of local people here that own an awful lot of buildings. And these, in fact, our co-president of the Roslyn Landmark Society, Howard Kroplik, is half owner of it with another local colorful guy, Ian Zwerdling. And this building is still known as the Coin Mac building. Why is it called Coin Mac? Because the guy that built the building was a real entrepreneur. I don't remember what his name is, but what he did is he didn't manufacture, but he bought and he put these coin-operated washer and dryer machines in all of these buildings throughout Queens and the boroughs. And the piece to the right is the administrative part. That first garage door see, what they had to do is they would send trucks out, and that they would collect all of these quarters from the machines, and they come back with an armored car, drive into that. That's actually a new door. It's made of glass. Originally, it was a metal door, because these guys now, it's no longer used for that purpose. There's a gigantic, or not a gigantic, but there's a vault inside the building that's still there. And that's where all the coins were put. But now both of these guys are car enthusiasts, and if you look through, I guess you can't see it because of the reflection, but Howard is such a crazy guy. I remember when he bought it, he actually has a Tucker that's fully restored. He wasn't going to restore it, then he did. But then the piece to the left, that is the workshop and the storage area for all the machinery that he would ship all over the place, because he'd literally put the machines in the buildings and collect the money. And then there on the other side there was a bunch of loading docks. But what these guys have done, they've turned this building now, and Ian especially is known for this. He'll buy these buildings like this that once had this use, and then he uses it as a multi-use building. He's got office space on the second floor, and then he's broken the whole thing up with a gym and a dance studio and a guitar shop. The other side of the street is that's Lumber Road. Wide. We're all lumber yards here, both sides. And that building that's being built is going to be a luxury apartment building. Lumber Road, more recently than the original master plan, was rezoned because this was all industrial, which is why the CoinMac building was there. And this site was a site that was owned by Verizon. And believe it or not, they had like hundreds of trucks here, or however many they can fit on that site. And every day you had all these Verizon trucks scooting all over the place. In the morning, they all go out. At the end of the day, they all come back. But it was awful to look at. So again, with this incentive bonus to come in, develop waterfront, they were able to construct these residential high density projects. So this was the first one of these developments, and this is very recent. This brick building here. You know, it's very hard when you're doing a new building in a historic district, because what do? You know, does it look like a? You know, the historians say, you know, you don't want to make these reproduction buildings. They're really false work. Buildings should really, the words that they use is that you don't want to fool the historians. You know, in other words, 100 years from now, when someone's analyzing that building, you want them to be able to say, well, that building was built in 2000. You don't want to try to make them think it was built in 1900, you know? But at the same time, you have context, and you want the building to fit in. So this is the solution that they came up with. This was that first one where you got the incentive bonus, and they built that whole boardwalk there that wasn't there before. Now this building was an old wood structure, and we really wanted them to keep it. But you know, when I went in there again myself and looked at it carefully, and they said, Craig, we really can't keep this building. It's not going to work for us. You know, in today's world, people don't want to build wooden buildings on this scale anymore. They're not fireproof. The reason why those buildings are not around is ultimately they burn down. But there was just so many columns in the space, it just didn't make sense. So we said, all right, you know what? I really tossed and turned on this one. They said, we'll reproduce the building in a modern building, but we'll make it exactly the same dimensions. Exactly. I said, all right. So they built it to my chagrin. But you know, years later now, I look at this building and I say to myself, you know, when I do a walking tour like this, I can look at it and say, that's really a vestige of the old lumber yard on Lumber Road. And you know, there's it's a symbol. The grist mill built right around 1700. This is a building, another one that the Roslyn Landmark Society, we have taken on as a restoration project. And I'm extraordinarily happy that I've been very instrumental in getting this thing going with the Gary Charitable Trust and working with this other fellow, Howard Kroplik. The building was constructed about 1700. So it's one of our oldest buildings here. And, you know, like the other building, You know, it works on the principle of a turning wheel that will be reinstalled right here where this other mechanism is that's temporarily taking the water. Because unlike the last one that we just saw where there was a controllable sluiceway, this water comes through from that pond over to this side, underground. And it has to be relieved. Someday, in the not too distant future, we'll have a running water wheel here. But this building had to be saved. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's probably one of only maybe two buildings of this type that exist still in the world. It's a Dutch designed building, and if you look carefully, you know, all of these members have been fixed up. The building has been dismantled. It's been raised and put on a new foundation. And there is a lot of deteriorated wood here. If you look up to the top floor, you can see these pegged connections. And all of these pieces that were removed, sent up to Vermont to specialists to be remade. This is a multi-million-dollar restoration project to a very important historic building. It's very unique. It measures 50 feet by 25. And it's an extraordinarily interesting building because if you see this structural framework and you see how closely it's spaced, this building was designed to support a tremendous amount of weight. And unlike the other one that ran tools, this is a milling building to grind wheat or corn or whatever you wanted to grind. And inside of the building are two gigantic stone, they're not here now, we have them off site, two gigantic stone pieces that grind against one another. That's where the wheat is ground. So we're very excited about this. That little wood framework up there, that's just a mock-up of where the roof is going to be. So stay tuned for this one. It's nice to see it at this state. Another building, it's the first time I've ever talked about it on a tour, but I think it's relevant. This was another famous Roslyn establishment. It was called the Blue Spruce Inn, and it was on this site. This picture is taken, the Blue Spruce was much closer to the street, and as you can see here, this parking lot is pretty much where we're standing up here. And like I say often, what happens, what's the long-term history and fate of these big wooden houses, especially when there's a restaurant in it? What's in a restaurant? Kitchens and ovens and fire. So it burnt down in '74. And these new owners bought the property. And I just like pointing out and talking about it because I think it's a very nice building. You know, in essence, what this is, and I know most of my career has been spent working in the retail marketplace, retail interiors and shopping centers. Unlike the middle of the island where you have these Hempstead Turnpikes and Jerichos and Old Country Road, where you just get these real nondescript, cheap box buildings. I'm not talking about the big box stores. I'm talking about strip centers with a bunch of little stores in them, gigantic parking field in the front, and then the service in the back, just like it would have been at the grocery store. This one's a little more interesting. It's tucked into a hillside, and if you drove your car around here, there's literally a tunnel underneath. And you can see the building was designed in an interesting way because it has a center and it's symmetrical. There's some logic to it, and then there's a two-story, there's an office space above, and some stuff like yoga studios and this sort of thing, restaurants. And then on the sides here you have the diagnostic and this kabuto at the end, which is well-known Japanese food. And you know, it's been here for how many years? And unlike all of these other centers that get a new facelift every 10 years or so, this is really an authentic piece of architecture. So we'll walk by this, and I also want to point out this AT&T Tower that's actually slated to be removed, which I'm very disappointed about because we find this structure to be very. When I say we, unfortunately a small group of us find this thing to be quite important and a landmark and attractive. It was originally built for telecommunications from AT&T. They built these in the late 60s, early 70s, which is when this one was built. And this was a very important piece of telecommunications technology. And these happened all over the country. They're slowly coming down now, and they're normally used for cell towers now. You can see this one, you can just see above the tree line there, there's a few of these cell phone antennas. These other antennas that are on the top, they call them acorn antennas. They were used for the AT&T telecommunications. They're really not useful anymore because it's all satellites and cables, and these are no longer used for that purpose. But they are apparently going to take it down, and we tried. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to walk along the front here. We're going to go up to Rallye Motors. We'll stop halfway up, and we'll talk a bit about the Sinclair Martin Drive Historic District in this historic district across the street where Florence and I live. And the Trinity Church across the street, we're not going there today. It's for another tour. That was designed by Stanford White, another world famous architect, but 100 years earlier, 1900. So take a look at that. And there's beautiful Tiffany stained glass windows in that. This is the Sinclair Martin Drive Historic District. The architect in Roslyn that worked with the Garys lived here and was a very good friend of ours, Guy Ladd Frost. He's deceased now. And, you know, like myself, the Garys latched on to him when he came into town. They're beautiful houses. I'm told that they were built by Bill Levitt, these houses.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. The Roger he was concerned because Rallye Motors, after they built it, even though they were very pleased with it, Rallye Motors started buying the houses. And they owned the first one. And Roger said, you know what? I think they have a long-term plan here. And so he got this one as a historic district. And of course, this one was a no-brainer with these older buildings. In Roslyn, on both sides of the hillsides, we have what's called a Hillside Protection Overlay District. So anything that is proposed in those areas has to go through a very arduous review process. And that's what one of the beauties of Roslyn is, that we maintain these beautiful hillsides in this very bucolic environment. So so everybody here is mobile. We're going to go up and we're going to just talk. I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes outside, and then we're going to go in. It's a quick loop and we'll be done. There's an interesting story here behind this building. The owner of the building is a partnership actually with a fellow named Peter Terrian and George Moss. Peter had a little repair shop in the late 50s in Seacliff. He repaired imported automobiles, fine imported automobiles. Now, again, going back in history, you know, the only guys that really knew about fine imported cars like Mercedes were guys that came back from the war. So they had this repair shop, but they were forward-thinking, entrepreneurial guys. And it turns out that George Moss's uncle was a president or vice president of the Maserati Corporation, which was also in Glen Cove. Maserati wasn't making cars at the time. They were making tool and parts.
Okay.
They all got together. The Maserati guy knew the Mercedes people in Manhattan. They all got put together. Again, there's a very classy sophisticated guys that were interested in the finer things of life, and one thing leads to another. They get the only franchise to sell Mercedes-Benz on Long Island in Glen Cove, which is now where the Lexus dealer is. They become very successful. Again, this is the early 60s. You know, by the 70s, what's happening? You know, the American cars are starting to, the pinnacle of luxury in this country has always been Cadillac. Maybe not so much, not anymore, but it was. And there's still that term, it's the Cadillac of the world, right? Well, you may remember in the mid-70s, there was a guy, it came to this point, the cars got so poor in quality, some guy bought an Eldorado, couldn't drive it at all. It kept going back and forth to the dealer. He got so fed up, he drove it to the parking lot and set it on fire. Became a nationwide thing. You know, who's to say that really what kicked off Mercedes, but Mercedes was becoming a more popular car. So they set out to design this, to use the Wizard of Oz term, this Emerald City of car dealerships to sell these exotic luxury cars. So they, again, being smart guys, they went to several architecture firms, paid them money to develop. It was kind of a competition to design this building. And they didn't get anything that they liked. Peter played tennis with this guy and said, why don't you talk to this guy, Ehrlich Franzen? We've used him before, and he's an extraordinary architect, and see what he can come up with. So they tried him, and he came back with this concept. This is a bird's eye view of the building. They designed this concept of this super luxurious granite-clad building. This is what you're looking at here, and a workshop connected by this little link. So conceptually, it's that simple. And that's the service. Yeah, that's the waiting area, and the workshop is over there. And what does Franzen do? He designs this beautiful art moderne, streamlined architecture for the showroom. It's two-story space on the inside, and you know, not like other showrooms that just have a run-of-the-mill storefront system with a glass wall. This is all made with architectural metals. This is an extraordinarily expensive building to construct. Some years later, they put an addition into the building that you'll see, and they started selling BMWs also. So there's an addition on the back of the granite building for BMWs. Later on, Mercedes said, listen, we don't want BMW there. The BMW has to go or you're not going to get your franchise. So they still have the BMW, they just moved it to Westbury. When Mercedes came to them and said this, Mercedes also wanted them to reclad this building like this, because that's what all of their showrooms look like all around the country, like along the 95 corridor. So we as the village said, no, this is an iconic building, can't do it. This sense of luxury just exudes here, and even the way they take care of their employees. But let's go inside. This really, really nice guy, Doug Foss, is going to give us a little tour. So is Doug around? Thank you, Miss.
Thank you for visiting with us. Our goal here is to give you a Neiman Marcus type experience when you buy a car. Mr. Tarian, who's no longer with us, when he built this place, had that in mind, and his wife, Juliana, continues the business to this day as president and CEO. It is a very people-focused business. Grand architecture, very open floor plan. The effort was to make you feel like you weren't confined and that you could shop in a way that just allowed freedom and not really he didn't want anybody to feel captive. And couple that with a Mercedes brand, very high-end brand with great looking cars. it's really a fun place to spend some time. And so this is the new car showroom. We're going to take a quick peek back in the used car showroom, which is right down the corridor. If you're familiar with this area, it used to be a BMW dealership attached to the back of this building. And now they've moved it to Westbury because the brands were fighting with each other and the brands insisted they have their own space. A couple years from now, we're actually being forced into a whole remake. This is going to be blacked out. The whole inside will be black. It's a new look that they have, very modern type of setup, but that's 2027. It's about a $14 million renovation to get it to look like that because it's not built for that right now. So quite an investment on our end. But
without the outside, right?
Without the outside. We can't touch the outside. It's a landmark. All right, I'll bring you into the back showroom here. We're going to go right down this corridor. You can see the architecture is a little different back here, a little less wood, a little more industrial. This is what BMW wanted at the time. This will also get refit into the all black version of the showroom that we're going to be doing here in 27. So back lot right now is stuffed full of service cars, 400 cars back there. We're going to come outside here on the deck. We'll take over into service. This is the customer area where you'd come in and have your car serviced. So we can bring you up, let's show you the upstairs waiting lounge in the employee lunchroom. So we have 190 employees. And the owner is very employee focused. Which is a rare thing in the car business. So she's very philanthropic as well. So it's really a great place to work. So this is the waiting lounge. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring you out into the shop area and then show you what that's all about. So this is a shop. It's got 48 service bays in it. The very back has very tall doors to handle the Sprinter vans, which can be with the RV additions on them, can be quite large. So that's, you can see the doorways way down in the distance there for them to come in and out. These are electro-hydraulic lifts that are just sunk in the floor, and they sit in their own little capsules, so what little hydraulic oil is in them is contained for environmental reasons. Now we just take that metal plate off of the middle with those big bolts there, and we can service the pit, what we would call the pit, without interacting with any of the ground soils. This facility employs 190 people, and about 130 of them work on this side of the business at any given day. It's a super place to work. This is as good as it gets in the automotive industry on the dealer side. So it's a privilege to work here. And we take a lot of privilege in our keeping the spaces clean. I don't know if how many of you had any time in some auto shops. It's usually not this clean. And we appreciate that our guys take the extra time to, to just take care of their own workspaces. We provide them toolboxes so that way everything looks somewhat uniform. But take a little bit further stroll here. So what I want to point out is cars are very modular today. When you're doing heavy work, this is an engine out of the car here, transmission underneath of the vehicle in the center of it there. This assembly here is called a subframe. So it's an actual structural part of the car. It mounts with these rubber mounts to the actual unit body structure, if you will. And sitting in this, on these two mounts, is the engine connected to it. So we actually can lower the engine out of the car by just taking that front frame down. That's how and they came up with this setup not unique to Mercedes, to create efficiencies in mass production. So in the assembly line, the engines come already mated, sitting on top of the subframes and ready to just bolt right into the car. When they go in what we call a drive assembly. The plants are amazing. They're very choreographed. All production plants now, when it comes to vehicles, are very robotic. It's what they call just-in-time production. So what's going on in the plant is what's going on in the plant today. And as the 18-wheelers are coming up and they're unloading cargo with robots going in and literally going in and grabbing a pallet, pulling it back out. That pallet has got a barcode on it. They know where it's going to go. It gets unwrapped by another robot. The individual boxes on there, then a human takes the part out of the box and puts it in these like hanging racks. And then a robot comes and fetches it and puts it on a cart with its part number assigned to this specific VIN number of a car. And then it gets onto a robotic cart and it meets the car at a certain point in the production line. And they just pluck the part off and it goes right onto the car. So, and this is just happening with thousands of cars running through the plant in a day. It's just this gigantic choreographed play, if you will, that can't go wrong because you have to stop the whole line if something goes wrong.
Exactly.
So a lot of effort on the industrial engineering side of it, efficiency engineers. They look, how do I get 30 seconds out of the build of this car? How do I get 10 seconds out? It's a six-figure job to be a technician on a German product right now. It's really labor intensive, and you gotta be smart. A lot of education goes into these guys. And the battery electric vehicles, I was hoping we'd have one in here for service before you came, but it just worked. They happen to be a little reliable, so they're not in here as often as some of the gas-powered cars. But they're a little scary to work on. You know, you've got upwards of 800 volts and 1500 amps sitting in the pack. So it could deliver that 1500 amps in a millisecond. It's actually an electric vehicle up in the air over there next to the G-Wagon, the black one there. But it is kind of interesting to look at how the difference when you take a look at an older traditional suspension vehicle with gasoline power, and you look at the bottom of an electric vehicle, there's much simpler design. This whole center area here, all the way up to here. So this big black plastic rectangle, if you will, this is the battery. It's about that tall. It weighs about 1,800 pounds. And it's a structural member in the car. It sits in a casement because it has to be protected from water, and it has to be temperature controlled, heated and cooled. In 27, the first non-lithium batteries are going to make it to the market. Toyota will be first, and then the other brands will follow. The new batteries don't have that thermal issue, and they also have about a 40% better range. So this exact car, if we just swap the battery out, this car does about 340 miles. That car's going to do about 480 to 500 miles range. That's the first generation of that battery, and they're talking about that by 2030. They think the cars will be in the 800 to 1,000 mile range, which is phenomenal, because then that gets rid of this whole range anxiety thing that we all suffer with these. By the way, this is the famous G-Wagon that you see running all over the place here. We lovingly call it the ice cream truck. It looks a lot like one, but amazingly popular still to this day. So I have a 3-year waiting list for them. Yeah, and the average transaction price on the AMG version is almost $250,000 for that vehicle. A lot of modern tech going on here. Any last second questions for me? We'll egress here.
Well, thank you, Doug.
Absolutely.